So thank you for attending. And yes, if you're not here to find out more about the Applied Directorship Programme, please feel free to drop off. And yes, as Warwick said earlier, we want to try and make it interactive. So the idea is to answer your questions. So if you've got something you're stuck with, something you're wondering about, something that we haven't mentioned in terms of the program, then please, unmute and ask the question or put it in the chat if you're struggling with sound, etc.
And there's no such thing as
a
stupid question. Just so you know, if you're thinking it, somebody else on the call is thinking it too. So just pop it into the chat or unmute.
So for those of you, very quickly, for those of you who haven't heard of Sirdar before, we use the name Sirdar in the context of the lead Sherpa on a mountain expedition. So we use quite a lot of mountain climbing imagery, and that's why. And we use the name specifically because we want to go with you on the journey all the way to the summit. So you decide how big a business you want to build, how big a mountain you want to climb, and the Sirdar goes with you on the journey. So it helps you build the team, helps you find the right people for your board, helps you train everybody, make sure you've got the right tools, etc., make sure you've got the right equipment, and then goes with you on that journey. And that's what we try to do is, as consultants, advisors, and company secretaries, supporting you in every way we possibly can to make sure your board is effective. And part of that is training. So that's why we put together the Applied Directorship Programme in 2017 and have been running, I think, over 65 cohorts now, something along those lines, and at least 800 people have done it. And the idea is it's to help and support anybody who is either a director or aspiring to be a director, whether they are only an executive director, whether they are looking to become a non-exec director, in all its forms. So it doesn't mean that you need to have a vast board full of non-execs, etc., to benefit from the knowledge and learning you to cover on the course. We try to make it as practical as possible. And really the idea is to make governance as practically applicable as possible, as easily to understand and apply as possible. So it's not aimed to be a theoretical course, it's aimed to be an interactive workshop where you apply the learning as soon as possible outside in the world, and then come back and give us your feedback on what's worked, what hasn't, so we can help and support you to move forward.
Yeah,
so,
I think,
very
Tim,
different from classroom training typically.
Yeah, it's a good place to sort of stop and speak about differentiation. Is that often what you do if you go to a business school or university is that they'll take a whole load of your money and say, okay, and let the learning begin, and then in kind of a year or two through like academic rigor, you start kind of getting to concepts with not our philosophy at all. What we want to do is we want to give you practical tools that you can use from the first, almost from the pre-reading. So from the time that you actually sign up, and it'll just enable you to practically make an impact and make a difference on your business from the moment you get involved. And I think that's just really a differentiator, but also it's important to say, because a lot of the sort of bits of training that you do have got a slow, everybody speaks about instant gratification versus delayed gratification, and not that we are the sellers of instant gratification, but we certainly are. We are a lot more aligned to giving you instant value in terms of your business and your processes and what it means to set up a board, etc.
Yep, and we really want to take from every module we go through, we want you to be able to apply some of that in your business as quickly as possible. It's not the intention for you to wait till the end. And then maybe just a quick introduction of myself. So Tim Holmes, I've been with Sirdar since 2013, originally from the UK, and I'm senior partner and head of sales. And Warwick, who's also on the call with me, is our CEO, and he bought out our founder, Carl Bates. So he's also a shareholder. So for those of you who are experienced directors, what we're trying to do is fill the gap. So we've had plenty of people who've been directors for 10, 20, even 30 years do the program and very quickly started saying things, oh, if only I'd known that 10 years ago, that would have stopped X, Y, Z. Or I realize now that there's so many things that I didn't know about because we didn't talk about them in the boards that we were working with, or the boards I was involved with were frankly quite dysfunctional, and thank goodness I've learned all these different tools so I can go back and sort out those issues. So it's to fill the gaps with as comprehensive an understanding of what being a director means in its totality. So we try
Also,
to
Tim,
bring in all kinds of
yeah,
influences from all over the world now, because we're moving towards the point where we have a global standard with ISO 37000 standard. So all of the stuff we're teaching is basically globally applicable, because the governance standards, the governance acts, the companies acts, etc., are starting to become closer and closer and more closely aligned with each other. Sorry, Warwick, you were going to say something?
Absolutely. No. What I was going to say was that one of the things that that a load of people don't really understand, and often I've been on the other end of these hostile takeovers and corporate transactions. And when you've birthed the company and you've put your sort of investment in time and energy in it, and it all of a sudden is going to be taken away from you because you haven't really looked at what your shareholders agreement says, or you haven't really looked at who's holding your shares or in which vehicle they're being held. It really is quite poignant that you understand that kind of thing. And it's really, really basic. It's really easy to get right, but it has dire consequences if you don't get it right and if you haven't considered it. So at a practical level, just understanding this stuff, even if you don't intend to be a non-exec director, is critical for your own business. And also if you're going to go around, seed round funding, private equity, or some kind of corporate transaction, these are things that are really, really important to just understand. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, and for next generation directors, we work with a lot of family businesses all over the continent, and there's a very big difference between the way the first generation went through the business, developed the business, grew the business. Now the second generation, they've been to better schools, they've been to better universities. Their expectations are generally different, and their expectations are typically that however they go through the process, whatever the family arrangement is in terms of how much experience they need to get outside the organization, there is an expectation that ultimately they'll end up on the board of something within their family portfolio. So it's really, really important that those individuals can add value as quickly as possible. And that's why it's critical that they do some director training, because things have changed since their parents went into business. Things have changed that they need to be very much aware of before they move into those roles, so they can actually professionalize those business units and divisions and take them to the next level and really move them forward into the second, third, even fourth generation if possible. And for aspiring directors, if you are looking to become a director, and we get a lot of people making inquiries for director positions, it's really, really critical that you know what you're talking about. And the best way to do that is to do some kind of combination like the Applied Directorship Programme that brings in practical experience in a simulated board environment, along with the theory and the law and all of the other bits and pieces you need to be aware of if you're going to be moving into that non-exec director space. And for CEOs, entrepreneurs and founders, particularly if there's a potential for an external investor to come in, the common feedback is, oh, I'm not going to bring non-exec directors in because they're going to take over my company. Well, why not upskill yourself so that you can bring non-exec directors in, and it'll actually improve the way the business is operating, because you've got other heads helping you make better decisions. And particularly if you've got investors coming in, they will impose directors on you, because they're saying, I own 10, 20, 30% of the shares, whatever it is my right to appoint a director onto the board. So it's really, really critical that you upskill yourselves or self to make sure that you're ready for that. You understand what it's all about, what you can, can't do, how do you get best value from those incoming directors, etc., etc. So
yeah, I think
anybody who wants to become a
that's
director
an
or
important
is a
part,
director will get some kind of benefit from doing this kind of training.
There's a great opportunity, there's a great business opportunity to getting a new set of eyes on your business. And once you've got a non-exec director in, let's say it's from a private equity business, they're under the usual kinds of NDAs, etc. So that it's not like they can steal your trade secrets, but you can often leverage that opportunity, and you can get real subject matter expertise that you don't have to pay for. So there's a lot to be said for actually going along and getting or making use of that non-exec director as part of a deal if you're going to go and do a deal with any kind of equity partner.
Yeah, and there's an opportunity to push back and say, look, this person doesn't fit in with our company's values, or they don't have the skills that we need right now. Knowing and understanding what that looks like can be very helpful, because you stop them putting someone into the board that's completely inappropriate and is actually going to start making it more and more difficult to make decisions. We want to bring people in who are going to help you with the strategy, because they're better equipped than you at doing some aspect of moving the business forward. That's the particular value of bringing non-execs in, and independent non-execs directors specifically, because you don't have an emotional connection to how the business got to where it is. You're looking at from the outside, looking in, saying, well, I'm just going to question this or test assumptions or see why it's gone the way it has or where it is, and see if I can help and support you to improve and move forward, because I've got that different perspective, that unemotional connection to the past. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to move people from being wherever they are to becoming a high performance director. And this is the sort of definition that we've been using for a while, and it's lasted over a decade. So it seems to be quite robust in terms of describing what we're aiming for. So you want to make sure that this organization creating some kind of meaningful economic impact, and that's becoming more and more important, what meaningful means and what the impact means, because businesses are being looked at from the outside in about what are the outcomes they're generating, but also what have they been doing in the process that created those outcomes? How did we do it? Not just what have we produced? And in the board, as a director on the board, it's really important that you're not afraid to have those tough conversations. That's typically where a lot of boards go wrong. There's no one who's standing up to the loudest voice in the room and saying, whoa, hold on, we're going off track here. This is really dangerous. If we continue in this vein, we must actually dig into and discover and dig into this process a lot more before we actually make that final decision. And that comes from understanding, what are you supposed to be doing? What is your role? What is your responsibilities as a director? What kind of questions should you be asking? How do you prepare properly the mundane aspects? What is a board paper supposed to look like? How do I interrogate it? How do I get the best value from it? How do I push back to management to give better board papers in the future? All of that stuff is covered in the course, and it makes a huge difference if you can start to improve those communication mechanisms and understandings of the role. So that starts with the director, and then ideally we want to move the board forward. And as we said, we've got multiple opportunities to run a board meeting. So you start to get to understand that rhythm. What does a decision-making process look like? How do you hold a company accountable? How do you measure performance? How does performance link to the culture and the strategy? All of those kind of things need to come together so that we are meeting regularly in a deliberate cycle. We have things happening between the board meetings that help us prepare better for the board meeting. We have committee meetings. They have all those kind of things that start come to play to get that rhythm and momentum going within the organization at the board level. And that's going to improve shareholder returns, and it's also going to improve the economic impact that you have on all of your different stakeholders. I see Rebecca's just come in. Hello, Rebecca.
Feel free to ask. Yeah, feel free to ask. Ask questions, etc. Yeah, 100%. Also, I think that one of the things that Tim's touched on, but it is quite important, is that this is a process. And so a lot of people come onto the call and they're like, oh, hold on, like, we don't know if we kind of worthy, or if we've, if we've had enough experience, etc., etc., etc. I think one of the most important things for any director role is inquiring mind, being inquisitive, and not being afraid to ask questions. And I think that, as you go along in this journey, you'll find that is the sole and most important skill. Is that you'll find that the quality of your questions improves as you get more and more experience. But the fact that you can ask them, and that you're confident enough, and that you really understand how these things work is going to just improve the quality of the questions and improve the quality of the process.
See, Buchanan's got his hand up. Did you have a question?
Trying to catch your attention for quite a while.
Sorry, that's me. That's my fault.
Am I on mute?
Yeah, no, we can hear you. Thank
you.
Go
for it.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, sorry. I was saying I've been trying to catch your attention for quite a bit now, just to raise a techie a techie issue. My chat is disabled, so I haven't been able to type my what is it, position and
Okay, sorry. Let
etc.
me just get onto that quickly. Apologies.
All right.
Yeah, various
Thanks.
other people have typed something into it. Suman's just typed something into it.
That's cool. I think that you have to be. I think that you have to be. You have to be logged in. So let's just quickly see if we can fix that.
But by all means, please ask the question, or just give us the feedback verbally if you can't type.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm an independent non-executive director. I am on the board of a listed company in Gaborone, Botswana, and I sit on various other boards as well, including Old Mutual Life Insurance Botswana.
Okay. So what would you be looking for from any kind of director training?
I think it's about the gaps. In my experience, I think the biggest challenge has been where board members are not able to transition between operations and being strategic, and that strategic responsibility on the board.
Yeah, there's a big issue.
Yeah, so what typically happens is you're spending 80% of your time on operational issues and 20% of your time on strategy.
Sure. Now, actually, I'll just go through what we cover in the sort of the broad context of the training, and that'll potentially answer your question just now. So one of the things we have realized is that there is common misunderstanding or just no knowledge, a real deep knowledge about the difference between the three hats that we end up wearing, particularly for entrepreneurs. So we've got the hat of shareholder, hat of the director, and hat of manager. They're all different. And what typically happens is we'll tend to, if we think we're in a board context, but we're all managers as well, the conversation will drop down to where that lowest common denominator is. So we'll have very operational discussions. One of the benefits of an independent director in the room is that it gives the opportunity in that team to lift the conversation and start talking much more about strategy and being directors rather than operations. The other issue is that things rise to the highest common denominator. And if you've got a lot of shareholders on the board, then we start to argue with our shareholder hat on, well, I'm a majority shareholder, therefore. And we get the dominant voices in the conversation based on how many shares they have. Whereas if we look at what it should be, there should be clear differentiators between those three hats, and they have different contexts when they are allowed to speak, and they have very much more need to control the communication and particularly the confidentiality between those different hats. So there's a hard line. If you want to protect yourself and get the benefit of PTY limited, in other words, limited liability, then the shareholders need to stay out of the strategy conversation. They need to stay out of the decision-making process. Shareholders have a very specific set of rights. They have a right to return on investment, and they have a right to appoint and remove directors. That's about it. They can obviously define what the purpose is of the organization. If that changes fundamentally, then you need to go back to shareholders to check they're still on board. But they don't have a right to get involved in strategy. They don't have a right to influence the way operations are working. That's up to the board to define that strategy and then communicate down to management through policies how we want the operations to operate. So shareholders are typically, the only thing they have in common is they have at least one share. And those shares may or may not carry votes, but I've got a share, therefore I'm a shareholder. But we could have come into that position from all kinds of different places. We could have inherited them, we could have bought them, we could have been given them, we could have earned them. There's all kinds of reasons why we're a shareholder. So we're not equals. Whereas in the boardroom, it's a team of equals. You only have one vote. You must, as far as possible, try to reach consensus. We don't want to be voting for things at the board level if at all possible. Whereas the shareholders, the only power you have really is to vote for something. And then management is the pyramid, is the triangle, because it's a hierarchy. We are not all equal. And making the shift, which I think someone mentioned earlier, from management to the board is often really difficult because we've gone from a space where we're often telling people what to do and not necessarily talking about strategy. We're very focused on operations. Now we're in a space where we must be all thinking about the strategic objective. We must all be heard as far as possible. We must all be involved in the decision-making process as far as possible. And when we leave the room, we must all be on board with that decision. We cannot second guess it from the moment we've moved out of the room. We need to be unified in the way we communicate outside that room. So the just mechanism and the way we operate is significantly different from the way we operate in management. And that's often why it's such a difficult transition. And to complicate that, we have different relationships with this thing called the company. Shareholding is, by its very nature, quite a selfish relationship because I want something back. I've bought these shares, I've put this money into this company, whatever. I want a return on my investment. Either I want a dividend or I want to see the capital grow. The majority of that energy is a selfish engagement. For the board, it needs to be completely the opposite. We must be doing everything in our power in the best interest of the company. And we must declare any kinds of conflicts. We must step out of the room if there's any kind of conflict. We must be demonstrating that all we're doing is in the best interest of the company. Very different engagement. And management is complicated because there's a contract involved, and the contract defines specific things that we need to do for the company, with the company, in the company, and then we get some kind of remuneration. So that interest is going to kick in if we don't get the bonus we were expecting, we don't get paid like we expected, we don't get that remuneration coming back to us. So it flip-flops depending on state, mood, time, etc. between I'm going to give my all to the organization or I'm not going to give anything at all because I feel like I'm not being valued. So there's all of these different hats have different relationships, and the only way they work is if you keep them in separate meetings so that we have an AGM where shareholders are thinking with only the shareholder hat on, and they're thinking about the performance of the business and what kind of return they're going to get, and is that why they invested, is that what they expected. In the boardroom, we must have a board meeting where we don't think with our shareholder hat on, we think about the strategy, we demonstrate leadership to the organization, we think about policy and how do we make sure that the organization has some guardrails with risks, etc., etc., etc. It's a different conversation, it's a different responsibility. And then we pass down the decisions to management to implement. We pass down the strategy to management to implement. And then we monitor and measure it from the board. So the roles are significantly different and, as I mentioned, commonly misunderstood. Anyone have any questions on that bit? Because that's a fundamental part of what we cover in Module 1, and we take you through practical examples so you can feel the difference between making a decision when you're all wearing director hats versus trying to make a decision when you're all wearing different hats, to try and make it real, to make it practical. So you can go back to your boards and realize, okay, that's why we went wrong. Charlotte, yes, you've got a hand up.
Hi, afternoon. Is it afternoon? Yep.
Yes, afternoon.
Afternoon, everyone. Afternoon. I think from my side, with what you're putting forward when we're looking at the three hats, it's very difficult if you're in a business that's founder-led,
Yes.
as I'm sure you've realized. And it's all and well to go through the training, and I'll bring a couple of directors within the board. I was going to say my board, but it's not. Within the board that I think would benefit from this. But I think the bigger thing is, how do you then change the mindset for founder-led business? Because a founder knows everything. And people that have been in the board for 18 years, we know everything. So why are we going to go onto a course that shows us how to be better when we know everything? So it's very difficult to change that, especially if you're sitting in that management cycle and you add it onto a board, which I guess also murkies the hats, right? So you're a managing director, you add it onto a board, and then you're a shareholder. So it's just murkiness all around. So it's all and well to go on the course to know how I can effectively direct at least my team, what I can control a bit better. But it's very difficult when you go into a boardroom that's 100% shareholders and just based on the foundation of the business. That's not something that's easily changed or movable, especially with principles that have been there for a very long time. It
Yeah,
feels like
and
you're going
that's
against the grain.
it typically starts from the shareholding position. So when we're dealing or when we're working with companies, we need to find out quite quickly, have the shareholders bought into and understood that things do need to change. They may need to unlearn things. They may need to learn new things. They don't know everything. And are they prepared to move forward and be vulnerable? And if their mindset is we know everything, then it's really, really difficult to build an effective board, because the conversation ends up being dominated by the loudest voice, which is going to be the founder or the majority shareholder. So it needs the change needs to come from those individuals. Succession planning is something also that a lot of founders don't think about, and building a robust, strong board is a really big part of succession planning, because otherwise the company's entirely reliant on you, and if you're not there, it's going to fall apart. And is that what you wanted? Is that the legacy you wanted to leave behind? Do you ever want to take a holiday or retire at some point to go and do some more fun stuff, even if you spend a lot of time in the company? What are the things you want to get out of life in general, and what do you want your legacy to be? And that's even if you want to sell a company, that's still a succession event. And a lot of that's just not understood. So it starts with shareholders, definitely starts with founders to think, okay, I need to maybe be doing things in a different way from the way I've done it before, because times have changed, the law has changed, responsibilities have changed, all kinds of things have changed. Unless we've done regular education, we don't know everything, and that's difficult for a lot of people to admit. Warwick, yes, you've got a hand up.
Here's a really good practical bit of advice. So when you have a board, often what happens is that the founder will then move along and say, okay, I want to give up control because I don't actually want to work 9 to 5, but I want to then appoint an MD and I'll stay the chairman. Now there's that is a recipe for disaster, because if you had thought that it was difficult to deal with a founder who is the actual boss, imagine if the founder then gets to be the boss of who he says is the boss. And so what you end up with is you end up with these all, like terrible corporate outcomes. And you'll find that particularly in corporate, where you have had a CEO who thinks that the natural transition is from CEO to chairman. It isn't.
That's very popular in America.
I always say to anybody establishing a board that and people are reticent to want to spend money on a non-executive. But if you're going to spend money on a non-executive, make that non-executive the chairperson. Because what will then happen is that the independence will ensure that that chairperson puts in a good board charter. And then the rest of the board feels empowered to refer to the charter. Because then you're not being personal and you're not saying, well, you're a narcissist and you don't listen to me. You're saying, respectfully, according to the charter, this is what we need to do. And so that's a really, really practical way. And Charlie, I've been in lots and lots of these Bidvest type, I'm not going to name names, but Bidvest type organizations where, a lot of the directors are actually just cross director positions within the group. And then all you end up with is that these massive political bun fights. Now, independence there will actually be the order of the day. And an independent chairperson is really, I think, the anchor point of that governance intervention. And so that's certainly something that we advocate for and train for, is how to chair properly, how to not try to have your voice heard, but to conduct that orchestra. To get the best out of your non-executive directors and also executive directors in trying to execute on strategy. Elmarie, nice to see you. Great observation in the chat. Just around, Tim was saying that you're not operationally involved, so you push downward, and you said the strategy goes downward. what comes back up is that evaluation. So there's always a polarity. So everything is always circular. So as much as you as the board give the executive management the strategy, what you've got to do is you've got to also build into that strategy regular little checks to make sure that the strategy is being executed on effectively. And effectiveness is Tim mentioned earlier that, we believe that one of our goals as Sirdar is meaningful economic impact. Now that means not wasting resources and being as effective as possible. Who had a hand up? I saw.
Warwick, yeah, Trevor had his hand up, and I know Trevor's
Trevor.
got some experience of what we've just been talking about. So please go ahead, Joe.
Warwick is chairman of a family-owned business, and I resonate very much with what you're describing. My impression is that, and coming from a 4-generation family-owned business, and you probably have had this experience, is family businesses just have possibly the innate reluctance to wanting to have either a non-executive chairman, and do you not think is also an educational void in family-owned businesses to understand the benefit
Absolutely.
of actually having the right corporate governance in their organizations? And I'm speaking from experience in our own company, for that matter.
Yeah. So, Trevor, I think that you're absolutely right. And I think that one of the interventions that we've suggested to specifically family-owned businesses is to create a family council, or to, in fact, create a family board. Because what often happens is that you, as the chairperson of your family, try to conduct business with family business. And the two are incompatible in many respects, because actually your family are predominantly shareholders. There might be some executives that work in the business, but you're constantly then just having shareholder return conversations. So what we've suggested is to actually separate out the two boards, and you have an operational board which looks after the business, and that's a non-executive chairman. And then in the family board, you remain the chair, because you're the chair effectively of your family holding. And what that does is it almost forces a separation of those hats, but it also then has a sort of side pod. And so you can come into your main board, not necessarily as the chair, but as a contributor. Because I think one of the disciplines to learn as a chair is that you can't contribute as much as you could had you not been actually running the meeting. So you can run your family board, have a pack of very, very good questions that you can then take into the operational board. And I know it sometimes seems, if you're just running a family business, it seems like that's way too many meetings, that's way too much admin. But if you keep that nice and tight, and you have those meetings, you sort of schedule them for 90 minutes, and you go to agenda, and you don't one of the things that Tim will talk about later on in teaching directorship is often boards of directors overload the agenda, because you're saying, oh, it's a quarterly meeting. Any decision, just delegate upward, and let's just make that for the board meeting. And often you'll find you engage with people and they say, oh, no, we're waiting for the board to meet. The poor board. And that's when you hear these monstrous things like 7-hour board meetings. It just isn't efficient. And so
that's where delegation authority becomes critical. Absolutely.
So, and again, in a good board charter, delegation, and also to build meeting cadence. And I think a lot of people don't know, you can't actually have, and it's kind of like riding a bicycle. You didn't go and enter 947. You say, I'll learn to ride on Saturday, and then on Sunday I'll enter 947. Right? And often people do the same thing with board. They don't go, okay, hold on, let's establish good meeting cadence, and let's meet monthly so that we can just do 3 agenda items, and just get through 3 agenda items. And then we get that sort of discipline. And then you can extend your board meeting into quarters. So there are a couple of again, much of the stuff is quite obvious, but there's a couple of these little interventions that once you put them in place, you're like, wow, that makes a lot of sense.
Now you can slow things down before
the family council structure is something that you find many family businesses do adopt?
Yes. Particularly in private offices, where you start making some good money, and then you start looking at investment management. And I think it's absolutely critical. Having a family council is critical, because what you will do, Trevor and I grew up in a family business, is that every last cent gets put back into the family business, which is the very worst thing to do. And so actually what you have to do is you have to have the discipline to say, is this capital that we are removing, this dividend, etc., is the best place for it back into this business? and be robust and be honest and say, no, actually, let's put it into a fund of funds. Let's put it into a unit trust because we've got to de-risk. And so a family council, I think, in family business is absolutely critical.
That's an interesting topic.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question and the interaction. Thank you, Trevor. Over to you, Tim.
Cool. So just let's get into the detail of the course itself, just to give you an overview. So the first two modules are the foundations. So we talked about the three hats. Then we move into the simulated board meetings. So the cohort of people on the course are split into 1, 2, 3 boards, and you decide what you're going to make. So there's a manufacturing company that we're working with. You decide what you're going to call yourself, and then we could design a logo. So you get board papers from that moment on with your company name and your brand, and you get your financials as it moves through the simulated process. And then in each meeting from module 3 of the course onwards, we go through one of these areas of our governance compass. So this is very similar to ISO 37000 standard, except that we are working on momentum and the order of that you naturally would go through things, whereas the ISO is looking very much at outcomes on the outside and then what drives those outcomes in the middle. So it's a outside-in perspective, and then a core purpose. There's a purpose that appears in the core of ISO 37000, and it goes outwards. So that we're very comfortable that all of the things we've been teaching for the last 16 years are actually in the first ever global ISO governance standard. So in the first module, you define in your team what is going to be our strategy for these next 8 board meetings. What levers are we going to pull in this manufacturing company to outcompete the other boards in the cohort? And then in the next module, you start looking at culture. So we'll give you some example board papers around culture. Then as your team, you need to define, well, what is our culture going to be? How are we going to show up? Are we going to have pre-board meetings? Are we going to all make sure that we always attend? How do we communicate with each other if we can't, et cetera, et cetera? So you're applying it and learning it at the same time, but it's compartmentalized to try and make it as manageable as possible, in that you're only focused on one area, one theme per month, to give you time to read the readings, watch the videos, have the board meetings, and then we move on to the next segment or the next segment. So all of these 8 areas are covered in modules 3 to 10, and then module 11 is when we go through the evaluation process, and everybody gets a chance to give their feedback, and I give a summary of all of the other different modules that we've covered during the course, just to remind you the key things that we've discussed in the 11-month program. Bit of a refresher at the end, just so you can pick up the key things that you may or may not have forgotten. So that's the framework. That's how we started and how we ended up with 11 modules. The other piece of the puzzle is that we're firm believers that if you're building a board, you need to understand the profile of the individuals around the table, so you can identify where the gaps were from an energetic perspective. And we use a tool that we wrote a number of years ago called Contribution Compass. So all of these tools come from the original I Ching Chinese philosophy, and we're predicting the future. This particular one, we've got a very specific use case, which is we built it to try and understand what happens in a boardroom, and then we can link it to our governance compass. So activating is spring, inspiring energy is summer, sustaining energy is autumn, is winter, and how they show up in your energy and your personality is activating is changing things. It's wanting to do something different, something new, something chasing the new shiny, exciting technology. That's very useful in an organization, but it has its limitations. It has its challenges as well. We need to understand who in the team can naturally understand who the people are that we need to be talking to, who the people are in the organization, and do we have the right teams? How do we inspire them? How do we help them